Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk about fingerprint matching system. A while ago, we uploaded this video. This is about capturing fingerprint using web or JavaScript. And that was really good. And there have been a few questions about how to do the matching. So today I wanted to talk about that and also walk you through how you could do that. Without being specific about any provider or any programming language. Okay, before we move on to the calls, I would like to go through this infographic to understand the process. So this describes a specific cloud provider where you can upload the fingerprint and do the matching against it using the API. So that's step number one. You create an account with the provider, and you get your API keys so that you can make API calls from your application. So what we are looking at is step number 3 and step number 4. So let's assume a user has registered on our web application, and now the next step is we have to capture the fingerprint. So user's there, we know the user identifier, for example, a user ID, and the user data is stored in a database. Now we need to do the enrollment. So we need to capture the fingerprint of the user so that next time the user can authenticate himself or herself using the fingerprint. So when we capture the fingerprint, we have to store the fingerprint somewhere. So that's what happens with step number 3. So we got the fingerprint, and that fingerprint will be sent along with the metadata, for example, user ID, and then the provider will store that information. Next time, when the user put the finger on, and the system will tell us, oh, this is user ABC. Then we can carry on with the further steps, with the further process. So that is about this APIs and how we can do that. I wanted to show a few API calls that I have done with a specific provider, and that may help you to understand the whole process. And conceptually, it is the same with anybody. And you can also have a on-premise system, so it doesn't have to be a cloud provider. But I would recommend using a third-party provider who is expert, in the field. So because it's biometric information, you have to be very careful with the data. So, right. So let's talk about this Postman collection that has all the API calls. So first of all, you have to make a call to authenticate yourself from the application to get a token. So that is going to be an access token, which is valid for a certain period of time. It could be like 10, 15 minutes, or it could be an hour. So it depends on the provider. So once the token is there, the application is ready to do the enrollment of the user, right? So where we are is user put the finger on, so the device JavaScript API provides you an image, and we know who the user is because user has registered with our system, with our web application. Now we have user ID, the fingerprint that we are ready to send to this provider. So the second API call here is to send the data to the provider. So the registration ID field here is the unique user ID, but that could be anything. So it could be simple number, or it could be a UUID, whatever, however you design your system, but it's a unique identifier for the user. So the client key is the key provided by the cloud provider, and secret number is the request ID for every request. It's a good practice to pass a unique reference so you can refer back to that particular request. Right. So here is the fingerprint data. So the position is obviously we have 10 fingers, and every finger has an index. So the position to it indicates a particular, so it could be a right hand and index finger. But then you have to refer to the documentation to know the details. Okay, so the interesting part is the base 64 payload. So the fingerprint device will give you different formats. So the fingerprint itself is presented in different formats. So it could be JPEG, PNG, WSQ, or base 64. But the format that we are interested in here is base 64. So that's here. So you have to make sure you retrieve that base 64 from the JavaScript API before you make the call. And then, yeah, you are ready to make the call to the cloud matching system. You send the request to them, and then you will get the response back, whether the user has successfully registered or not. So once you got the confirmation, so the enrollment process is now complete. So the user can, next time, instead of using username, password, or any other, authentication method, he can simply put his finger on, and the system should know who the user is. So that is the verification process. So that is going to be the next call. Yeah. So it looks very similar to the previous call. However, we wouldn't pass the user ID, obviously, to detect the user. So in this case, we simply get the fingerprint data from the JavaScript API and make sure you get the base 64 and put in here and send the request to the provider. And they will come back with the results, whether they found a user or they haven't. That is in the result set. So here you can see they did find a user with ID 001. So in this case, you can see the matching system did find the user with ID 001. That is the one we sent in the first place. But alternatively, the API call could also fail. So in that case, you could come back and say no match found. So which means either user has put a wrong finger into the fingerprint machine, or the user hasn't been enrolled into the system in the first place. So whatever the reason is, you have to think about what the process is from that point onwards. But this is the overall process of how a fingerprint matching could work. So it's a standard web application, or it could even be a desktop application. It doesn't have to be a web application, but then you can still make API calls to the provider and do the matching. And there was a question about storing the matching, having the matching system locally or on premise, and then you do with your application, you do talk to the system. So again, I would highly recommend shop around and find a provider that works for you, because it's very sensitive data, and so you better leave it to the experts to deal with it, and you can simply make the API call and do the matching. And from my experience, this is not expensive, and integration has been really, really simple. So I hope this is beneficial and this is helpful for your project. And I wish you good luck, and thanks for watching.